had called me 3 weeks ago. I had just had bilateral bunionectomy surgery the day before. And that's why I'm wearing these beautiful white shoes with this black outfit. It's because my pins came out 2 days ago and I have my feet in shoes. And after I exercise my big toes and get them moving again, then I can get up in the higher heels. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'm comfortable. I don't have to wear those orthopedic things walking around. I feel like I've got ski shoes on my feet tonight. So for that, I'm very thankful. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not sure why I'm here, because I think all of you know so much more than I do. I feel like I'm in kindergarten, and all of you are college graduates. But I'm going to share with you some of the things that I have put together. First of all, I wanted to share with you some of the things that we had done with our Black History Project. When I say our, what I'm talking about is the Howard County NAACP. What we had done in 1984 in conjunction with the 350th celebration. I think I got a lot of stuff in here. And before you leave, I want to give you the slide, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Something going on over here. Something like order. During the 350th celebration of Maryland, each of the counties was given $10,000 to spend for projects that were related to promoting the 350th celebration. $5,000 of that could go for educational things like fairs and whatnot, in relation to education, and then $5,000 went to things like promoting bigger fireworks displays. That's what we did here in Howard County. So I asked for a grant so that we could do the Black history of Howard County. It's something that just came to me out of the blue. Why don't you do it? It's never been done before. And I thought, why not? And the NAACP is one of those groups where if you want to do something, we'll let you do it. It's all right. So I did it, and I had my way with it, and I could handpick my committee and do pretty much what I wanted to do. And I worked with the 350 committee for Howard County and met many people there, and they were quite helpful in getting us to complete this project. What we ended up with was a 300-page book, and you know, I didn't even bring a book with me. 300-page book. I do have a copy of the what the cover looks like in here somewhere, on history of blacks in Howard County. And the project got to be so big for me, I asked 2 other authors to help me write it. I wrote the oral history section, which is the first section. I asked Dr. Silas Kraft, Sr., to do the section on education, since he had been in the county for over 40 years, specifically for education. And then I asked a newcomer to Columbia, who had been here, I guess, about 8 or 10 years, and that was Lily Price Wesley, who got married after we had got the book cover printed, to do the history of Columbia, how blacks who were in the county felt about Columbia coming in, and how blacks who came into the county just got along with people who were moving in to enjoy this experience in Columbia at that time. In the process of pulling all of this data together, I was also, in gathering my oral history, first of all, taking my camera everywhere, and you may not have yours, but I do have mine, and taking pictures of all the people that I interviewed. I interviewed some 100 people, and the criteria, the main one was that they had to be born in Howard County, they had to have been here for 50 years or so. And they had to be willing to sit down and talk to me for a few minutes. And most of those few minutes ran from anywhere from 3 hours to one place for 8 solid hours. I can't believe it. We ended up with 79 tapes. And one of the things I plan to do in the future is to get all of those really transcribed on paper. This is something that I'm going to work with the archives in Annapolis, because they are interested in doing something like this. But also, as I was saying, in gathering the data, I also took 2 cameras. One to take pictures of everybody I talked to. These are just samples of some of the people that I talked to and whatnot. I just took this out of a book that I have at home with all of them. And then I had another camera that had the film in to take slides. And so wherever I went, I took slides of people, whatever was there, I took slides of. And I also asked them for old photographs, anything that they could share with me that I could then take to a photographer who could take a picture of, and we would return it. So all of this was done very neatly. They all signed an agreement that said that whatever they said on the tape we could use, and that whatever we wanted to do with any of the pictures, that was perfectly all right. And then when I took the pictures back, of course, they signed the release. It meant that I kept a list for mileage, I kept a list for the people I went to talk to and the dates, and I also sent a thank you note the very single day that I went to talk to all of them. Now this was easy to do, and God has a marvelous way of just allowing you to have the time to do things when it's the right time to do it. And at the time I was doing this project, I was assistant professor of nursing at Coppin State College, which meant that I had the summers off. My husband had been assigned to a 3-month job in Dallas as a part of his job here, so he was out of the way. So that I could make all of these appointments as early as 6 o'clock in the morning or as late as 8 o'clock in the evening, 7 days a week, anytime. And so I had all this uninhibited time to gather all of this information. Someone has asked me how difficult was it to get started in a community where none of this had ever been done. After the first 2 interviews and people understood the purpose of it, I had no problems whatsoever in getting into most of the homes, except one. And this was a gentleman who was shy in the first place, and he says that he was so used to people like social workers coming around and talking to people and taking all that material back and using it against people in the community that he was a little leery. But when I went to speak with him, we talked for 6 solid hours. He did not stop. When I left with his canned goods, because he canned everything out of his garden and had all kinds of pictures and things. And even something that he said that was important enough to me that I brought the tape so you can hear those few little words, and I'll share those with you in a few minutes. I did bring along a few of the slides. The entire slide presentation is 140 slides, and it would have been more than that, but I cannot find a carousel that will have any more than 140 slides. The library has a copy. The Historical Society will have their copy as soon as I give it to them tonight. The Archives has theirs, and several other places in the community. The school board has theirs, and several teachers have used them. The beauty of all of this entire project is that it was a process where blacks and whites worked together from the very beginning. I had such people as Herb Joel, who works down in Ellicott City, down at the, you know where I mean, down where the Baltimore, where the railroad tracks are, down there. And he, yes, and he, the station, you're right. And he would see things because he's really putting together the history of Ellicott City. And he would find things for me. He'd call me and say, Alice, are all your words in stone yet? I've got something you must use. And it would be things that he would find at the library that was related to black history that I could use. He would also come across certain photographs that I hadn't seen before, and some of those we even put in the book. And it was also such people like Ed Schultz. Does anybody know Ed Schultz? Who found all kinds of things related to houses that had been used by slaves in the county. And he got those pictures to me, as well as the history on of that. There were several people on the committee that we had worked on for the 350 committee here who were always calling me with encouragement and people to see, and I never did get around to see everybody, and that's the beauty of it, because history only taps in a small part of it. There's always so much more out there. And I have people even calling me now and they say, when the next book comes out, you must include this. I also have one woman in the county who was very upset with me because I did not include her in this book. And she felt she should have been included in this book. And maybe she should have. And I have to tell her that there is no way one person can do all of it. And that whatever is there to be told, it definitely shall be done. I'm going to share a few of the slides with you from the slideshow, and then I also want to tell you, and I'll tell you again before I leave, that we'll be showing the entire slideshow on February the 22nd at the library at 7:30 as a part of their Black History Month of celebration there. The slideshow lasts for 22 minutes, and I think we have about a couple of hours so we can talk about other things in that. It's pretty much well done, and I'm quite proud of it. Oh, Central Library. I'm sorry, Central Library. That's a good point. If someone can get the lights, I would like to turn them down so I can show the slides. And after I finish going over the slides a little bit and sharing some things with you, then I want to talk with you about some of the things that I have done on my own family. Please turn the light up. Let me make sure that I get this.
Custodian has to put a key in.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
No, we had the same problem.
You do?
Slides are nice.
Okay.
We'll wait.
So then when he comes in, well then I will do that.
You can just be in there.
Okay. People, their problems, their feelings, it does not get into genealogy simply because there was so much intermarriage and just inter-exchange, and as I heard over here, just mixing up between the blacks and whites in the county, that it was impossible to keep a genealogical chart on everybody. It was just absolutely impossible to do. But it was a book that was related to pain is one of the feelings when I had a particular mother who described to me her feelings as she dressed her dead daughter, who was only about 2 years old, in a beautiful dress, and laid her out on the couch in the living room, because at that time there wasn't such a thing as a funeral parlor, but every house had a parlor, and so that was one of the things the parlor was used for, wakes and weddings. I think he's going to turn it down for me now. There was also such things as sorrow, that one of the oldest woman who I interviewed, who was 98 years old, and she was telling me the story that had been explained to her by her great-grandparents who had been slaves, and that how pitiful it was for them when her relatives had been taken from one of the areas in Howard County to another. They had been separated from their family, and she says that whenever the families got to be too close together at times, they would be carted off in a wagon and they would be just taken away as families go. And that's why it's very hard to keep a genealogical lines on many blacks. It doesn't matter where they are. Now, let me see if I remember how to do this. First of all, I think you turned it on. I hope all these slides are in here right side up, because I was getting ready to leave the house and I happened to look in my tray and I had another show in here with 100 slides that I had forgotten was in this tray, and this was the only tray that I had to use because the other ones were all filled. So I did a quick job on here, and whatever comes up, I'm going to talk about
That is something really interesting.
Okay. The light will not come on until the first slide comes up. There. Wait a minute, I'm turning it the wrong way. There. Oh, now back up. This was just the front of our slide that shows the name of our slideshow. Howard County, Maryland, Black Presence, 1800s to 1984. And I wanted to put a date on it, not because after 84 it's no good, but that's when we stopped putting it together, and that was a part of it. My name is listed as the director, and the narrator was Dennis Roberts, who was on our radio in Baltimore, and he has a very deep baritone voice, and it sounds very good on the cassette. The map of Howard County was to show that we tried to touch pretty much all the parts of Howard County, as well as some names that you don't hear about. You don't hear much about Jonestown anymore. And there were some other little areas that people would talk about that weren't on the map, but these were just nicknames that people had for the community, those who had lived here for a long time. So we touched all parts of the county as much as we could, from Poplar Springs all the way over to Elkridge to North Laurel, to Howard and Fulton, Clarksville, and all around. One of the things that we found in our studies was a book that was located in downtown Ellicott City. And this was a book that was a listing of slaves as of 1868. And this was after slavery had ended. And we found out that the record was still being kept simply because there was something about the government was going to pay all these slave owners for some of the slaves that had been free, and also because it's just like when integration became a law, it didn't go into effect right away. It takes a while for things to happen. But one of the things we were looking at in this record was that it listed the, let me go back to the other one. It lists the names, it lists the age, it lists, some of them were slaves for life, some of them were slaves for only so many years. It also lists their physical condition, whether they were, there's one there that's silly, there's one there that's feeble, and also they put all that stuff down if you had a scar or whatever, and also some of the men enlisted, and that was also put on some of the records. There was one slide that I didn't get in here, and it was of the Clark family. And one of the things that we got from the library, Central Library in Howard County, was that the land that Clarksville is sitting on, when the original Clark brother came here, he bought that land from a blacksmith whose name was John Howard. And we can't find out where John Howard came from, but somehow that is in the atlas that's up at the library. This is a lady whose name is Sarah Dorsey, and when she was 42 years old, that was the year that Howard County was separated from Anne Arundel County in 1851. Oops, went the wrong way. The next picture at the time, this was her 84-year-old granddaughter, and what she has is a quilt that Sarah made, and the picture shows, and let me back up to the picture. Uh-oh, the other way. Well, anyway, what I was trying to show, okay, was that the quilt is made of the same fabric that Mrs. Darcy is wearing in the dress, because she was a quilter. And her 84-year-old daughter says that was one of her jobs when she was going to school, was that she had to go by her grandmother's house after school to thread the needles because her grandmother had trouble seeing. Now, let's see if I'm going to put this in the right direction. We're going to get through this evening. Okay. In Daisy, one of the jobs that men had, there were blacks and whites on here, was at the rock quarry. And that is what this is. And that rock quarry was used for a lot of the buildings in Washington, D.C. that are there now. There was a railroad that ran near there that they loaded all these huge chunks of rock on, and on it went to Washington or wherever they made it so that it could be usable. One of the men who's on here, we have pictures of him, his sons, his daughters, and they are a part of Daisy, and his relative was one of those people that you go to and she just delight to talk to because she has all this information and she's willing to share it. A tremendous amount of pictures came from this particular family. I'm almost scared to push this thing.
Yeah.
Okay, let me keep my finger on it. The other picture is the sawmill, and this was another job where blacks and whites worked together, and they just traveled around to different parts of the county because there were trees all over. This was a rural area. And one of the things that I enjoy so much about this picture, I'll tell you a little later, that's about a patient that I visited in the hospital, and he was 95 years old. And he was explaining something that was in relation to this sawmill. I'll come back to that in a little bit. This was a picture of a brass band, and the brass band was just made up of, look at all those instruments. So this was around 1920, 1930, and even before that time. And whenever there was a fair or any type of gathering, they were there for recreation to entertain the people. There were baseball games. I understand there were even horse races that were out on Route 108, is that around West Friendship, where that the men would be on horses and they would run with a spear and try to grab the lance. I said, I've never heard of this in Howard County. Yes, that's very true. This is a picture of a young man who, this is taken in 1910, and what he and his mother and his father are dressed up for is what is called Emancipation Day. And this was held in Laurel, outside of Howard County. But this was a holiday day where the blacks in Baltimore, in Washington, all over the state went there for Emancipation Day. It was just a huge celebration of it. And it was generally held around the second Saturday, if I remember correctly, in September. What I liked about this picture was that that's a horse and buggy that's behind them. This is a gentleman who had worked in the county all his life, and I have his voice on the tape because there's something important that he said to me that really stirred me, and I'll share that with you a little later. This is one of the schools in the county, and as you know, the schools were all segregated at that time. As it is in most of the southern schools, there were generally more girls in the schools than boys. Now here it doesn't look like it so much because these are young boys. But as the boys got bigger, they were pulled out of school to work the farmlands. And that was in the springtime for planting and in the fall for harvest. So it was generally the girls in the families who got more of the education because somehow they didn't get pulled out to work those heavy fields. This is a nice looking car, isn't it? I think that's pretty good. This was a chauffeur who was on the Warfield Estates, and not only did he drive a car for Governor Warfield, but he also purchased many cars on his own, and he was one of the few blacks in the county who actually owned his own cars. This was a picture that was given to me by his son, and I just like old cars. Can you tell I just like transportation? That's why I put it in here. The lady in the front is named Cosette Harding. She still is very much alive and active in the county, and she wrote a couple of poems that are in the book. This is a log cabin house that's still standing on Route 97. It's out in Cooksville. It was built around 1850 for a lady whose name also is Dorsey. And Mrs. Dorsey had been a slave for Thomas Hood. I think he was one of the first commissioners for Howard County. And when she was freed, her name was Sarah Dorsey, when she was freed in 1850, the family was so afraid that she would leave the county and go down further south to look for her relatives that they built this house for her in hopes that she would stay. So she was given her manumission papers, and they built the house, and it worked because she did stay. That house is still in the family. It has been in the family all of these years, and they still live in it. And I tease them all the time because I tell them they leave the Christmas tree lights up all year long. The house has been approved for the National Historical Registry, and the owner has not signed the papers because he says he doesn't want people traipsing in and out of his house all the time. This is a picture of a lady who was a cook in Eldridge, and I guess I like the picture because it just looks elegant to me. That no matter how hard you work during the week or whenever, when you got dressed up, you were really somebody and you felt proud, and she looks like a proud woman. You don't mess with her when she's dressed up or she'll And he's all dressed up. This is another, Dorsey is a name that you find a lot of blacks and whites all over the county. This gentleman's name is William Dorsey, and he's still alive. And he knows I've got this picture, but he didn't give it to me. It was somebody else in the family who gave it to him. But he was all dressed up in his Sunday best with his patent leather shoes on and his little dress, and my goodness, I guess his mother loved him. This is a very proud lady, and this is why I have her in here. This was one of the women who also worked on the Governor Warfield estate, and she lived to be about 98 years old, and it was her daughter who gave me also about 12 or 13 pictures, as well as some paraphernalia that was related to the area. And it was her husband who was also in the picture where I showed the rock quarry. This is a lady called Dora Mack Carter, and anybody who has been in the county back 20, 30, 40 years knew this lady very, very well. She lived in Guilford. She was from one of the wealthy families there. The Carters, the black Carters in Howard County were considered one of the wealthier families. She was noted for many things. First of all, she was a trained musician for voice and piano. She had choirs in Washington and the area, and she took them on trips. She also had this little mom and pop store in the community, and she really set the dress code for Guilford. You could not walk into her store unless you were dressed, and even the men who made deliveries to her shop kept a shirt hanging up in the cab because they knew they could not come into Miss Carter's store without having that shirt on. The children tell me that they used to try to run in there with their shorts on or with sleeveless things just to make her angry, and she chased them out every time. And this is something they mostly remember her for. She always had the high top. She was also a school teacher, and she was always very prim and proper. And I guess she died about 10 years ago. But at Guilford First Baptist Church, the old church that's right on the grounds is named after this lady, the Dora Mack Carter Center, because her family was instrumental in starting the church years and years ago, and because that was her community. This is a lady, her name is Texas Myers, and she lived in Elkridge, and she was a faith healer as well as a midwife. In traveling around the county, one of the things that I heard over and over again was that whenever a woman had a baby, she stayed in bed for 9 days. And they were very specific. It wasn't 12, it wasn't 14, it was 9 days. And she could not get out of that bed except to use a chamber pot and get right back in that bed. And that baby also stayed in the room with her, and they kept the shades drawn because they were fearful of too much light coming into the baby's eyes. At the end of those 9 days, then she was, and it had to be at the same hour that her baby was born, it was then that she was allowed to get out of bed. We hear of women getting out of bed sooner than that and going back to the fields 2 days later, and I don't know which way works. All I know is they had lots and lots of babies, and they lost lots and lots of babies, so I don't know which way works. But anyway, that was the rule then. Regardless of who you were, you stayed in bed for 9 days. They also tell me that her husband did not go near her for 30 days until after she had her first menstrual period, because they felt that the woman was unclean the whole 30 days and she was not even allowed to cook. So, boy, we should try some of this. One of the things that I had never seen in my lifetime was a stove, the stove that can't make up his mind what it is. So it's electric on one side, and on the other side is wood burning. And this stove is still being used today out in Poplar Spring. Your sister had one of those? Yeah. In Howard County, we still have wells, and this is what this is. This is the only water source that this family has. The well is very deep, and this is a gentleman who picked up the bucket and opened the well so I could see that it really was, and the water is very cool. And you know, we still also have outhouses in certain parts of Howard County. If you want to know where some are, I'll tell you. This is a gentleman, his name was Evan Snowden. And he was also what we consider one of the wealthier blacks in Howard County. He was a blacksmith who had a shop in Baltimore. And then here in Howard County on Brighton Dam Road, he had a poultry farm. And here's another picture of him, because I just think he's a handsome man. I just haven't put him in for myself. This is his wife, Alice. And Alice ran the poultry farm. And she had 2 stalls at Lexington Market for years and years and years, all types of poultry and eggs and whatnot. And I understand she also had a stall at one of the Washington outdoor markets as well. And that went on for years and years. This is their daughter. This is her when she was grown up. And I wanted to put in a picture of the house because this is an unusual house in Howard County, whether you were black or white. Definitely if you were black. This was a most unusual house. This is the front of it. It was very well kept. As I say, these people definitely had money. This is the front of the house, and this is the back of the house. And that is not an outhouse that's back there. That was a smokehouse originally, and of course it was used for storing just equipment for the farm after that. And I put this lady in here because she's related to the Snowdens, because I love her dress. And I think so many of the clothes, that's one thing that pictures help bring out is what women wore at that time. And you really get a good feel for seamstresses and what they were able to do with or without the machines at that time. That's all of the slides. Okay. slides I have, I think I've got about 500, so it took quite a bit to get them down to 140 for the slideshow that we do have. What I was going to tell you about in relation to the rock quarry was that one gentleman that I visited in a nursing home, because that is one place that you can visit when you're doing oral history. He was 95 years old, and he was feeble, but when we got to talking about, thank you very much, those olden days, he was right on target with explaining how things work. And he talked about the machinery piece by piece and how the gentleman would line up on what side and what exactly their particular job was. And the thing that was so exciting to me was that he got caught up in the story and his hands became alive and his eyes lit up. And in the bed next to him, there was an old white gentleman who listened, and as Doris Myers moved his hands to move a piece of wood from one place to another, the gentleman in the other bed caught it. He was right in that story with him. I couldn't believe it, and I thought how beautiful it is that these men are probably in the room together for the last days of their lives. They probably don't even speak to each other, but for that moment in time, they were right together, right together. The other thing that I wanted to share was in going through the county, getting my stories, there was one white gentleman who stopped and asked me to talk to him because he says, you know, there's nobody in this county to listen to the story that I have to tell. When I go to the library, I read about the higher class people, and now you're going to have a book on blacks. But where is there a book to talk about the ordinary white individual in Howard County? So I sat down with this gentleman. I talked with him for 2 hours. I got him on tape. He shared his family paraphernalia with me that goes back to Germany. He was extremely proud of it. And when I finished, he reached into a box and he pulled out this old Indian head that his mother had found on the farmland with the plow that they dig up. And so I took it to my jeweler and had it wrapped for me. This is special to me because it came out of the soil of Howard County. Another very special thing that I found out in doing this search, and I won't be much longer because I know that it's getting very, very late, was that I found out that I had roots in Howard County that I never, ever knew about. There was a name that kept cropping up, and it was James Nelson Fitzgerald. And where his name kept cropping up was in Dr. Kraft's section on education in the board minutes at the Board of Education, where Dr. Kraft went through meticulously to pull out all of the information, the board minutes that was related to Black history. And Dr. Kraft, when he came to the county, he also said that the first house that he lived in was with James Nelson Fitzgerald because there was no other place for him to stay. Well, what I found out was that James Nelson Fitzgerald was related to my grandmother. They were first cousins, and I never knew that he was here in Howard County. I knew that I had Fitzgeralds in Baltimore, but I did not know that they were here. So that was very, very much special to me. One of the things I wanted to share with you, and you can believe as being in charge of this book, that I put his picture in that book. Let me see if I can find it. I'll come up with it pretty soon. Also, with James Nelson, that I had these letters in my hand, but I did not know who they belonged to. But what I found out later were these are love letters between James Nelson Fitzgerald and his wife. The oldest one goes back to 1887 when they were courting in Tennessee, and it goes through their courtship, their marriage, problems after their marriage. And they were writing letters because, first of all, James Nelson was in college, and then he was teaching away from where they were. So he was constantly away from her and then coming back together again. The letter also talks about putting $25 down on a house, and the house was yours, and I was the house. It also talked about people who were coming to visit, and the letters also talk about what people died from. It also talks about frustrations. It also talks about in one letter where it says, James Nelson, the young men in this town are unhappy with young men coming out of town, marrying their girls. They want the girls in this town to marry the boys in this town. And so when we get married, we may have to move. But these are very, very tender letters, very special, very sweet, and the beauty of them is that most of them are in calligraphy because that's the way people wrote back then. But it's tied with the same string, and I treat this stack very reverently. And going through them, I also found a teacher's certificate for James Nelson's wife in 1899 where she could teach in Greene County in Tennessee. So you see all of this, no matter what you do, you're related to somebody if you did long enough. You won't be able to see this, but afterwards I'll share it with you. James Nelson Fitzgerald is on here. This is a picture of 6 brothers who were my grandmother's first cousins from Johnson City, Tennessee. These 6 brothers had decided among themselves that they would only have one child so that if anything happened to any one of them, the other one would get married. Would take care of that child. Now, why that was a problem, I have no idea, because in the first place, 2 of them were lawyers, 1 was a pharmacist, 1 was a doctor, 1 was a mortician, and 2 were in real estate, so they all had jobs. They also had chauffeurs all of their lives except for 1 who was the doctor, and he was forced to learn how to drive in order to get around to his patients. But the rest of them had chauffeurs all of their lives, and that's something that you don't very seldom hear of at all in the black community at all. In sharing some things about my own personal family, I am a Hoosier, and those of you who are in genealogy, you know, of course, where I am from. I have relatives, and I think in about most of the states in the United States, and I am very pleased because they come from no education to PhDs. They've been coal miners in Kentucky and blacksmiths in North Carolina. In fact, my grandfather was a blacksmith who made the first straightening comb for Madam C.J. Walker. And if you know anything about black history, then that is something that is meaningful to you. I have become the person in my family who collects all the artifacts. And in trying to keep as thorough a record as possible, I am trying to teach others in my family how also to leave a trail behind them that those coming behind them will have an easier time in keeping up with them. One of the things that I've found is important is look for old autographed books, because even though youngsters take them to school, they generally always had their parents sign in the back pages. And the beauty of that is that from one of the articles in Reader's Digest February, it says that you can have your handwriting analyzed to tell you what type of personality you have. So that if you have the signature or the handwriting of a relative, then perhaps you can find out what type of personality they really have. One of the talents that I also have that I use in this is that I am able, it's a gift that I have, that I am able to hold a picture in my hand without knowing whether it's male or female, take that into meditation, and I come up with the personality of that individual, and I've been told that I have 100% accuracy. So therefore, I am able to use this also as putting together a complete picture of my family. I also try to share with students when I go around and make talks that it is important for them to be responsible for learning as much about history as possible, their personal history. Talk to people who are older than they are. Pull out old family Bibles, because, and if you pull out a family Bible, make sure that make sure that it's not a family Bible, but it's a personal Bible. And that's because people use their personal Bibles, I know I got to hear someplace, to put little odds and ends in. They put little articles about people dying. They put letters in there. They put other things that are particularly personal to them. Huh? Pieces of hair, and you wonder where in the world it came from or who it belonged to. I'm also teaching my children that when you sign cards to me, or as I do to you, I sign to my son Michael from his mother Alice or something, so that when his great-granddaughter finds that card 100 years from now, she'll know, oh, who is that? The problem that we find in many newspapers from, and I know you have found it, is that they will give a date that somebody died, but not a year. And if we find these little scraps of paper in certain Bibles, and so I'm very, very specific about, please try to date as many things as possible. In sharing a part of my life with you, one of the things that I am also doing right now that I'm extremely pleased about is in that I am running as a candidate to be a Jesse Jackson delegate to the Democratic National Convention. And just in doing that, my only thing is that I encourage everybody to vote whatever your persuasion is in the primary, because it is important that whoever you vote for, that you get those delegates in there. It doesn't matter to me personally how you vote as long as you vote. That is extremely, extremely important to me. The other thing that we're doing with our Black History in Howard County is that we're producing a 1-hour documentary on the Black history with Howard Community College, and we'll be finished with that in May. There is also a National Oral History Association convention that will be in Baltimore in October, and I will be doing a particular speech and some other things there. Two other things I want to share with you, and then we're going to go have some truth. In doing this project, there are times when I've learned it pays to listen to that inner voice within you. There was one day in particular when I was getting dressed to meet with my photographer to take some pictures to have slides made. And as clear as a bell, I heard, "I would not wear those shoes if I were you." And you know how you hear something and you say, I'm going to do what I want to do. And so I did what I wanted to do, which was to put those shoes on. What happened was before that day was over, I ended up in a cemetery with briar up to here. This was a cemetery that I had talked to you before, that's on Route 40 behind the 84 Lumber Company. That's an old black cemetery that belonged to a Methodist church that was there on the corner. And it was a church that I had passed by and I couldn't find it, and my photographer says, "Come on, I'm going to take you up there." And then when I got out of it and there's all these birds everywhere, I'm getting back in the car, I hear this voice that says, "I told you." There was another day when I was trying to set up 3 interviews in Elkridge, because I thought Elkridge was a pretty long way and I wanted to really get 3 in that day. I could not set up more than 1, no matter how I tried. When I got there, I understood why, because that was the house that I stayed for 8 solid hours. When I went in there, this lady had pictures all over the table. She had a family Bible, had everything in it. And in her genealogy, her great-grandfather came from Ireland. And so when St. Patty's Day comes, she wears all the green that she can, because she says, "I'm just as Irish as I can be." And then when we finished there, she put me in the car and took me on a tour of Elkridge to show me certain things that were related to black history, where the Underground Railroad used to come, where certain blacks used to be. So all this is to say, listen to your intuition as you're doing whatever you are. Before closing, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you one of my very, very favorite pictures, and this is me as a baby. No sense in coming out here and talking about myself. I don't share myself. So this is one of the pictures that I will be leaving for my children and my children's children to come. As I go around and talk, I try to tell people over and over, love your family, whoever they are, wherever they are. Find those roots and preserve them, because that is a part of you. And the more you find about yourself, the more you love yourself, the broader you are. And all it comes down to is that we are all connected one way or another to the universe. Thank you very, very much.